How far does your family go back in Canada?
My grandfather actually came here in 1909,
Okay.
and then my father came in 1926.
So why did your father choose to come to Canada?
I think
Your
because,
grandfather, sorry.
well, my grandfather came to Canada because he was in the British Army, and after the Boer War, the British said you could go anywhere in the Commonwealth, so he came to Canada. His brother went to Argentina. I think he was just for the adventure, and he came here and decided he wanted to stay.
Yeah. So when your grandfather come, do you know, was he in the lumber business or anything else? Or do you know what occupations he had?
Well, from what I've been told and what I know, when he first got here, I don't know what kind of work he was doing.
Mm.
But in the 20s and the 30s, he was working in the sawmill.
Mm.
And according to Jack Huppel, who passed away a little while ago, my grandfather was the first Punjabi to work on the booms,
Wow.
on the logging booms.
So what does working on logging booms entail? What do you do on the logging booms?
On the logging booms, when the logs are brought down through the river to the mill, and then the logs have to be sent up into the mill individually. But somebody has to be out there walking around on the logs.
In the water?
In the water. And sometimes you fall into the water, right? But you're walking on the logs can roll and everything, but you have to send one log at a time into the mill through their whatever system they have in the mill to get the logs in so they can cut them up and make them into lumber.
Oh, wow. Was your grandfather a dancer? Was he light on his feet?
I don't know. I've never seen him doing his job. I've seen him walking on the logs, but when I saw him, he was in his 60s, kind of a thing. But when he's actually doing the job, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah. Okay. And so then your grandfather came. What was his name, Uncle Joe?
My grandfather's name was Santa Singh. Everybody knew him as Chandawala because Chand was our village. My dad's name was Arjun Singh, and he actually used to use Chand as the last name at the back. So anything that you see with any document or his signature, it will say Arjun Singh Chand.
And when did your father come to Canada?
I believe he came to Canada in 1926.
Okay.
My grandfather had gone back to India for a little while, came back, and then my father came after him.
Now, was your grandfather involved in the Ghadar Party?
My grandfather was involved in the Ghadar Party. I believe he went to San Francisco as a representative of the Ghadar Party in Vancouver with 4 other representatives. Yeah.
Do you know who the other representatives were, Uncle Joe?
They're probably in Dari. Yes.
Yeah. And so your grandfather went back to India and then came back?
Yes.
And he brought his son with him?
No, my dad came after.
Okay.
My grandfather went to India, didn't like what he saw back there, and came back to Canada. And then my dad came. My grandfather never went back.
Oh, wow. And how old was your dad when he came to Canada?
My dad was doing the math. He's born in 1909.
Okay.
He came in 1926, so he's probably around 16 or 17 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what did your dad do when he was in Canada?
Well, he worked in the sawmill on Falls Creek. There was a sawmill there called Alberta Lumber. It wasn't too far away from the old Sikh temple on West 2nd Avenue. And my grandfather and my father, they had a houseboat, in which they called a hora in those days in Punjabi. So people, when they wanted to come to their houseboat, they used to say, let's go to the Chandawala hora, right? And that's why I think my dad and my grandfather, because they lived close to the temple, they would work in the mill. After work, they would go to the temple and help out there. And my dad got involved in the temple work, and he became the secretary and the president and the treasurer, and, on different years, right? Whatever the elections would, he would get elected, so he would participate that way.
Yeah. Did you ever see the hora?
No, I didn't. I've seen a hora,
Yeah.
not on Falls Creek,
Yeah.
on the Fraser River, when we first came to Canada, and we lived on Mitchell Island.
Okay.
There was somebody living in a houseboat hora thing,
Yeah.
where my grandfather would go and visit them,
Yeah.
because my grandfather knew them, right?
Yeah.
And I only knew them as like nowadays we don't mention caste, this and that, but in those days you either mention people by their village or by their caste, and these people were mentioned by their caste, and I don't know what their name was, but they were the people, like who make earthen pots in India,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So they that caste, whatever name you use for that caste, is what they were called by.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
It's so interesting also because for two things. I've heard of people living in bunkhouses, but I haven't heard of people living in houseboats. Were a lot of people?
The bunkhouses came after, I think.
Okay.
All right. As houseboats were, not being allowed, for whatever, city regulations, this and that. So people would buy a house, and in the house bunkhouses, it's usually men. They don't have their wives here, so they'd say to one person, "Okay, well, working in the mill is too hard for you. Why don't you cook for us, right? You cook 3 meals for us, kind of a thing. That's fine. We'll pay you an X amount of dollars, or each person will pay you." Like I know in the 50s, when the wages were a little bit higher than what they were back in the 20s and the 30s. So, like even I know a cousin of mine, who we sponsored and came to Canada in the late 50s, and he worked in the Prince Rupert in a bunk, and he lived in the bunkhouse. They were paying the person who cooked the meals $10 per person per month.
Oh, wow.
Right? Which was non-taxable income. Plus, that person got free meals plus room and board. So that person was probably making as much money as the people working in the sawmills.
Wow. A couple of questions then. Let me jump around a bit. The living areas of people in Vancouver, you've mentioned the False Creek area, Mitchell Island, Fraser, in that area. Is that where most of the population lived at the time?
Originally, most of the people lived in around False Creek, Kitsilano, because the temple was there. Then some of the people started living down on Mitchell Island because there were some mills down there, and they were working in those mills. You've heard of perhaps Amarjit Singh Brar. He had a sawmill on Mitchell Island, where everybody worked in his mill. So there was in South Vancouver, where there's quite a bit of a Asian population now. There wasn't. There was, as far as I can remember, there was one gentleman. He had the same first name as my dad, Amarjit Singh, but his village was Kanganingala, so they called him Amarjit Singh Kanganingala. His wife's name was Chandigarh, which is the same as my mother's name. He lived on 47th by St. George, next to the Catholic school. He had a business, so he had, and then he's the one who was the first gentleman who started importing Indian movies. And then he had this lady, we only know her, like I only know her by the name of Janaki, and she and him got together, and they used to bring Indian movies and show them at the. First, they started showing them at the Gurdwara, the temple, in the downstairs in the kitchen, right? And then slowly, there used to be a theater on Kingsway, just off of Fraser, and they used to show them there.
Oh, where the Fox Theater is now?
No, not the Fox. Fox is on.
Okay, it's more Main.
No, the Fox Theater is on Main Street, right?
Yeah.
No, this is just east of Fraser.
Okay.
About 3 doors down. I think they put up a new commercial building there now.
Okay.
But there used to be on the south east side on Kingsway, just off of Fraser.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What year was this?
They originally started showing their movies at the temple or at the Gurdwara back in the 50s,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And then in the 60s, they were showing them at the theater.
Do you remember what would they show it every Saturday night, every Friday night? How would it work with the Gurdwara?
At the Gurdwara, it was always Sunday evenings,
Sunday.
right?
Yeah.
Because everybody would go to the Gurdwara in the morning, and then you had the food around 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
And originally, when I can remember, the Gurdwara used to be, you went to the Gurdwara in the morning, you had all the services in the morning, then people would eat, some of them would go home, come back later on in the afternoon, and then they would go back upstairs again, and it was not, it was kind of a service, right? There was a little bit of a pot, this and that, but then any discussions they would have about the community, or in problems in general for our population, they would discuss them upstairs. Okay, and after discussing them upstairs, then they would come back downstairs and have langar again. So you actually ate twice on a Sunday at the Gurdwara, kind of a thing in those days.
I mean, I've heard stories of meetings about Gadar party issues or political issues, right to vote stuff. So that would happen on a Sunday afternoon. I guess.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Like as far as I can remember,
Yeah.
like the Gadar party and all that was way before my time.
Yeah.
But I do remember as a youngster, right, that we used to go to the temple in the morning and we'd be there all day. We'd come home 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night,
Yeah.
right? Because my dad was the secretary and he'd have to be there. And since we used to go on buses and everything, so we'd stay, instead of coming home and then trying to go back, we'd just stay at the Gurdwara.
Right.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Do you remember any of the movies that ever played in the basement?
No.
No? Any black and white films?
They were all black and white movies,
Yeah.
right? But I don't remember their names. I can't even remember which movie I saw yesterday.